Hey guys, welcome back. This week I want to talk about boundaries. I have done so many videos on boundaries and I've done courses. Boundaries are something that are extremely important because we don't learn how to do them. And if we're dealing with, you know what, and even if you're not dealing with someone who's toxic, like you need boundaries, right? Like you need to be able to protect yourself, your energy. You need to be able to teach people what you will and will not tolerate. It just makes for a healthy you and a healthy relationship. So let's get into 3 fundamental things that you need to learn and practice when specifically you're dealing with a toxic person. A lot of us growing up, we're not taught boundaries, and because we're not taught this really fundamental thing, then we tend to lean more towards dysfunctional or blurry lines. And when that happens, and let's just sprinkle in a little bit of codependency as well, let's sprinkle in a little bit of worrying about what other people think, let's sprinkle in a little bit of being a people pleaser, then we're going to be super focused on the outside and not really on the inside. So we're going to be focused on how do you feel? How can I make you comfortable? What's best for you? We're going to fear confrontation. I think a lot of times when we fear confrontation, we also really will struggle with boundaries, because if you're good at boundaries, then you know how to verbally communicate with other people. You learn how to hear someone who is getting frustrated because they're not getting their way, and you being able to kind of like hold on to yourself. So you learn healthy coping mechanisms for yourself as well when you are dealing with someone who perhaps doesn't really like what you have to say. And someone not liking what you have to say is a part of life. Not everyone is going to be so consciously aware of themselves to kind of like rise up and realize that their ego is talking, their wounded self is talking, they're not getting what they want, and so they're kind of like giving you backlash. Like most people don't really have that kind of like introspective way of thinking or taking real full responsibility for themselves. So when you are dealing with kind of like the average Joe who doesn't like what you have to say and doesn't like the fact that you're not giving them their way, then you're going to get little bits of backlash. And so you have to learn how to be able to soothe yourself and validate yourself and hold on to yourself when you are dealing with people in your life who perhaps don't want to hear what you have to say or don't like the boundary that you're laying out. I think a lot of people don't really even realize that they have poor boundaries until they kind of like sit back and all of a sudden they're just getting abused or taken advantage of to the point where they themselves are actually experiencing a lot of pain. When you start to realize, okay, I'm not happy, or I'm being taken advantage of, or I don't like the way this makes me feel, you could have been dealing with that situation for years and never really bothered to kind of like stand up and say, wait a minute, like something actually has to change here because this isn't okay. It took perhaps this one experience or situation where all of a sudden like you woke up to realizing that this is actually about me and I'm not laying out healthy boundaries with this person. Like I'm scared of confrontation. I'm scared of what this person's going to think. Are they going to leave me? Are they going to get angry? Like what's going to happen? And because that fear really takes hold of you, you don't ever really follow through with what it is that you know you should be doing. Or perhaps, quite frankly, you don't even know what you should be doing. Now let's magnify this just like a little bit here. Let's say that you are an empath. You are just a natural giver. And a lot of times people that really struggle with boundaries are people who are highly empathetic or people who are highly sensitive. So they're just very in tune to other people and they're just like a natural giver. They just want to help. And maybe there's some codependency sprinkled in there as well. But it takes work to kind of like pull yourself back to not do what you naturally want to do because perhaps you're coming from a good place, but it doesn't leave you feeling good. Sometimes even as an empath or someone who's highly sensitive, you're coming from a great place, but that place is still dysfunctional. It still comes from a place of you not being okay because you see someone else struggling. And now, of course, we don't want to see anyone struggle. We don't want to see anyone not get their way or not be happy, but that's a part of life. And so as an empath, you kind of really have to learn how to reel that back in and realize that that's not your stuff for you to be like diving in and giving all of yourself to in an unhealthy way just to either appease someone or if it really has to do with that kind of fear of confrontation. All right, let's lay the foundation. Let's lay the groundwork here. Number one, you have to know what you want. And this sounds crazy simplistic, but it's something that most people don't know. One of the key things towards really healing codependency is you having to purposely stop throughout the day and become very in tune with yourself. What do I need? How do I feel? What will make me feel good today? How can I best take care of myself? Should I be doing that? Is it good for me to be doing that right now? Having that kind of like internal dialogue really starts this like deep connection that you're going to start forming within yourself, so you can actually learn to begin to take care of yourself in a better way than you did before. Because right now your default is just to focus outward and not inward. So I know for me, that right there was a process in itself. Me purposely stopping throughout the day, because you're not going to be able to just go, okay, 1, 2, 3, I got all these things down and I can just do them all. You're going to have to start with like, well, which step is the step that you struggle with the most yourself? So having a healthy sense of self means that you're in alignment with your inner child. That means that you know, of course, what you think, how you feel, and what you need, and you're able to actually give those things to yourself. So you're never in judgment, you're just honoring that kind of like intuitive voice that's saying, hey, I need to go take a nap. Or if you're feeling kind of down, for you to stop and say, hey, what do you need to do today? Like, what do you want to do today that you think would actually help you? And being able to go on the walk that you know you want to go on, or that you know you should go on because it's actually good for you. This means that when everyone expects you to go to the family party and you know that by doing it, it's going to leave you drained and it's just a toxic environment, like you not going and putting yourself first is where you become in alignment with yourself and you're actually giving yourself the things that you really need in order to take care of yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that you just disregard relationships, and it doesn't mean that you never are going to do things that you don't want to do at times, but it does mean that you have balance between those things and taking care of yourself. It does mean that majority of the time I am putting myself first because I need to put myself first in order for me to be the healthiest. And it also means that I'm teaching people what the boundaries are in this relationship. Okay, so number 2 is going to be verbal communication. So the way you can become really good at communicating your boundaries and your standards with other people is, number 1, when you're super comfortable and really clear on what exactly those boundaries are, and you're honoring those things, meaning I am going to give myself what I need because I have to. So when you take full responsibility for yourself in that way, you're able to start that communication process. One thing that you're going to have to really work on is going to be the story that your mind's going to create that's going to try to make you feel guilty for feeling the way that you feel or needing the things that you need. I think when most people struggle with kind of like low self-esteem, they don't obviously have that good sense of self, they're not in alignment with themselves, and they haven't practiced confrontation. So being able to verbally communicate with people is something that you practice. And here's the thing, you're going to have to practice it with the people in your life who you know are going to push back a little bit more. These are the people that have the dominating personalities, the people who are really witty, the people that can come back at you with something. And a lot of times we just fear, what am I going to say next? So you can kind of like practice your little elevator speech on what it is that you're going to say, but that anticipation of what is that person going to come back at you with is really sometimes what will stop people from communicating their boundaries and their standards at all. I tell people all the time, like, as much as you want to rehearse the thing that you're going to say to this person, the boundary, I want you to also get really familiar and comfortable with what are the things that you're going to say to get yourself out of a situation if it starts to get a little toxic. I think the easiest thing you can really start to get comfortable with is saying really short sentences that kind of just get to the point. I'm sorry you feel that way. Unfortunately, my answer is no. I will not be able to do that. Please don't ask again. Just like kind of saying those small things over and over again, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have to start explaining why you have the standard that you have or the boundary. You don't want to start explaining why you need to go take a nap and you can't do this, or why it's not good for you to go to the family party. You don't want to be overly explaining yourself, because then you're just running the risk of getting yourself entangled in a conversation that you don't want to get entangled with. Some things don't need an explanation, and you'll learn that most people don't need to hear the explanation because they're going to respect what it is that you have to say. The people that are pushing and they want the explanation are then going to be the people that are going to try to cut you down. They're going to give you guilt. They're going to give you shame. And so when you start to kind of learn, okay, well, how does this person operate when I tell them my boundaries? Then you can learn, okay, what's the next thing that I have to do? Or what's the next thing that I have to say in order to kind of like squash this conversation and just close the chapter on it. One of the most fundamental things that I teach is the process of self-parenting, the process of being able to take care of yourself on mental levels and emotional levels. And it is really what we were supposed to learn. We were supposed to have a good, solid foundation of what it means to take care of yourself. First, you were supposed to get that from the outside. You were supposed to get validation. You were supposed to get motivation. You were supposed to get words of affirmation. You were supposed to get all of these things. And then over time, once you got them, you should have had like a really good layout of how it should look, what it should sound like. And then someone was supposed to teach you how to then do it for yourself. So I think even parents that had the best intentions and did all the things right didn't then teach how to actually allow you to do it for yourself when I'm not here. So they just continue to give good stuff, which is amazing, but you have to really be able to teach the child how to do it for themselves when the parent actually isn't there. So now at this point in your life, you have to accept that you will always have a voice inside of you. You will always have an inner child, and that is the part of you that will always feel the fear. I'm scared, I'm worried, I'm nervous. What if I can't do this? You know, it's going to sound a little like ego. It's going to sound a little like a wounded part of yourself that doesn't feel good enough. You're always going to have that. We all have those parts of ourselves. So since that part will always be there, now the problem is most people live through that part. So the reason why you fear confrontation, the reason why you don't have boundaries is because you live through that part of yourself. You haven't really learned how to be your adult self, your parent self, your higher self. You haven't learned how to step into that role. You've just always kind of leaned into the inner child role. And how you can tell you have this part is if you've ever gone to therapy. When you go to therapy and you sit there, you are talking from your inner child. You're talking from your ego. You're not talking from the higher part of yourself. You might throughout little bits of the conversation, but for the most part, the therapist is there sitting as your higher self, your adult self in a way, the person that is kind of taking, a step back and seeing the bigger picture that you're not able to see, the person that's coming from a little bit more logic and less emotion to help kind of pull those emotions out of there, maybe to help validate those emotions and soothe those emotions, but we don't want to stay caught up too much in that emotional side because our emotions are just coming from how we feel, and how we feel isn't always logical. And so we need really both sides. When we're coming from our adult self, then what we're doing is we're honoring what that child thinks, what that child needs, that part of yourself. And when we're coming from the adult self, that adult is really the person that's going to step up and actually have that verbal conversation with someone else, that's going to start communicating those standards, those boundaries, what you will and will not tolerate, just as if you were a parent. If you were a parent, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter if you never want to have kids, it's completely irrelevant. If you were babysitting a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, you are the adult. You are the one responsible for standing up for that child, and you would. You're the one responsible for giving that child what it is that he or she needs, and you would. You're the one responsible for honoring what that child thinks and how they feel, and you would. So that's the only thing you're learning. You're just learning how to do that for yourself. So the last thing is going to be enforcing boundaries, and to be honest, this is probably the hardest thing. I think for the most part, people will get 1 and 2 down, with enough practice and enough confidence in themselves, as my elastic is just sitting right here. But enforcing boundaries is something completely different, because what do you do when someone doesn't care and they're still relentless and they still push? What do you do when you're asking for certain things and you're not getting them? What do you do when someone still wants to take advantage, when someone still wants to throw the guilt and shame at you? So that's really where it's like, okay, well, what do I do now? Now, every situation and every circumstance is completely different. So this is not going to be a one size fits all. And sometimes I feel like that's the hardest part of what I do in terms of the videos that I put out there, is when you're watching this, I can't pertain the topic to your specific situation situation. And sometimes that's where actually doing the coaching is the most beneficial, because we can actually talk about this as it pertains to your life and your situation. But with boundaries, the thing that you want to determine is, how far do I need to go in order to actually protect myself? And not everything has to be extreme as just cutting someone completely out of your life, especially if there are people that you wholeheartedly can't cut out of your life. You might want to, but you can't. So if you can't, how do we create like parameters around the fact that you are not respecting what I'm doing, or you're not respecting what I'm saying, you're not respecting the fact that I can't go, and you're maybe beginning to verbally abuse me. Maybe you're just pushing so much. So this part is a little bit more difficult to kind of navigate through, but I will say it could be as easy as just disengaging from the conversation. That's enforcing a boundary. A boundary, again, doesn't have to be, I'm going to cut you out of my life, but it does mean that like I'm no longer engaging in this conversation and now it's over. And knowing your limits on how far you should go with this relationship. So where am I going to have to pull myself back? Maybe I don't bring you to work every single day, because when I go to pick you up, you're always 5 or 10 minutes late, and I've asked you very nicely to please be on time, because I'm giving you a ride to work and you need the favor and I need the respect. So maybe that's something that you don't do for that person anymore. Maybe the communication between you guys has to change, where it's more over text or email if you're co-parenting. So again, it's just about trying to figure out like what are proper parameters around the thing that this person is not respecting you on. If it is a relationship where you possibly could let the relationship go, you have to get to a point where you choose yourself over that person. Now, what do I mean by that? You have to be able to examine the people in your life and determine whether or not they're actually adding value into your life, or they're depleting the energy out of you. And with all things, you will always get to a point where you can make this decision. So if you can't make it today, don't judge yourself for that. You will get to a point where you have hit enough pain where you will be able to make that decision for yourself. I think the last thing with enforcing boundaries that most people will struggle on is really the guilt of having to let go of a relationship. Again, I think that really takes a lot of grieving and mourning of what you thought that relationship was going to be, and whether it's a parent and not having a relationship with a parent, or a friend, or a cousin, or an aunt, or whoever, especially when you've had a relationship. Perhaps you've had a nice, years of a great friendship with that person, and now it's kind of dissolved, and you have to let go of the guilt that you might feel for possibly hurting their feelings, or just the projection that you had that you thought this relationship was going to go in this direction and it didn't. So I hope this video has helped you. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you were taking notes. I hope you can really kind of like look back, watch the video again, and see like, where do I really struggle in this? Because here's the thing too, when you're struggling with boundaries, yes, of course, it's probably going to be across the board in multiple relationships in your life, but there's always going to be those key relationships, a few relationships in your life that you're really going to struggle with this on. And those are going to be the people that are not going to respect your boundaries, that are actually going to be the one that kind of push back on them. So I hope you have enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week.